their assumptions to the contrary, had turned out to have excellent sea legs. Apart from the lapping of the waves, the silence was absolute. How had she ever imagined this could work? The three of them, all alone in the dead of winter, in a deserted village way up north in the middle of nowhere, without electricity or heat, and the only way back by sea. If something happened, they had no one to rely on but themselves. And now that Katrin was facing the facts, she admitted to herself that their resourcefulness was decidedly limited. None of them was particularly outdoorsy, and almost any other task you could name would suit them better than renovating old houses. She opened her mouth to make the decision for them and accept the captain's offer, but then shut it without saying a word, sighing quietly to herself. The moment had passed. There was no going back, and it was far too late to protest now. She had no one to blame but herself for getting involved in this nonsense, because she'd let numerous opportunities to raise objections or change direction go by. At any point since the house project had first been raised, she could have suggested that they decline the offer to buy a share in it, for example, or that the renovations could wait until summer, when there was a regular ferry schedule. Katrin suddenly felt a cold breeze and pulled the zip of her jacket higher. This whole thing was ridiculous. But what if it wasn't really her passivity that was to blame, but the eagerness of Einar, now deceased, who had been Garudar's best friend and Leif's husband? It was hard to be angry with him now, when he was 6 feet under. Nonetheless, it seemed clear to Katrin that he bore the greatest responsibility for this absurd situation. Einar had hiked in Honstrandir 2 summers ago, and so was familiar with Hesteyri, where the house was located. He had spun them the story of a village at the end of the world, beauty and peace and endless hiking trails in an unforgettable setting. Garudar had been inspired, not by the lure of nature, but by the fact that Einar hadn't been able to rent a room in Hesteyri since the only guest house there had been full. Katrin couldn't remember which of them had gone on to suggest they see if any of the other houses there were for sale and transform one into a guest house, but it didn't matter. Once the idea had been mooted, there was no going back. Garudar had been unemployed for 8 months, and he was completely gripped by the idea of finally doing something useful. It was hardly going to dampen his interest when Einar expressed a keen desire to take part, offering to contribute both labour and capital. Then Leif had stoked the fire with extravagant praise for the brilliance of the idea and characteristically effusive encouragement. Katrin remembered now how much Leif's eagerness had got on her nerves. She had suspected it was partly motivated by the prospect of time apart from her husband, as the renovations would require him to spend long periods of time up north. At that time, their marriage had appeared to be falling apart, but when Einar died, Leif's grief had seemed bottomless. An ugly thought stirred in Katrin's mind. It would have been better if Einar had died before the purchase of the house had been completed, but unfortunately, that wasn't how it had happened. Now they were stuck with the property, and only one man excited about the renovation project, where there had been 2. The fact that Leif was so keen to take on her husband's role and press on with the repairs probably had something to do with the grieving process. She had neither skill nor interest in that kind of work, that much was certain. If she'd wanted to pull out, the house would have gone back on the market, and they'd probably be sitting at home watching TV now, in the comforting arms of the city, where night was never as black as here in Hesteyri. When it became clear that the project hadn't died with Einar, Leif and Garudar had gone west one weekend and sailed from Ísafjordur to Hesteyri to take a look at the house. It had certainly been in poor condition, but that did nothing to diminish Garudar and Leif's excitement. They returned with a pile of photographs of every nook and cranny of the house, and Garudar went straight to work planning what needed to be done before the start of the tourist season. From the photos, Katrin would have said that the house was held together by its paint, despite Garudar's insistence that the previous owner had carried out all the major repairs needed. For her part, Leif added